Oh, let's close the door. Hi. Hi, this is Deborah, and we're here at Montclair State University in the clay studio. And I'm going to show you today how to apply oxide washes as a final finish for your head sculptures that you made. So there's three different oxides that you can use to do this. One is Teal, one is red iron oxide, commonly known as rust, which we talked about in our glaze chemistry class, and the other one is copper carbonate. So I'll tell you and I'll show you what each one of those do and how to use them. So I've already put some into small containers here. I'm going to put a small amount. Now you can see this is only like a spoonful. It's really small. It's not a whole scoopful. It's just like a spoonful into a container, and then you're going to add water. So I do have some fresh water here that I'm going to add to it. Now how much to add? Well, I'm going to show you how to test that. You'll also need some newspaper with print on it, a sponge. A small one is best. You can use either, a torn one like this or your sponge. I have the spatula from the metal cabinet over there just to act if I needed something to stir with. And a bunch of brushes, different sizes. Small ones like this are handy when you're painting around the eye area. Otherwise, any bigger brush will do for most of the whole thing. So a sponge and a brush of some kind. When you mix the oxides in the water, you have to realize that you're mixing metal in water. It's going to sink. So you have to constantly be stirring. And you want to mix it thin enough so that when you brush some over the newsprint like this, you can read the newsprint through it. Now I can read this a little bit, but I'm going to add a little more water so it's a little more diluted. So we'll add a little more water here. Make it about half that. I'm going to stir it again because you have to stir it almost every time you put your brush in. And then we'll brush it over the newsprint again. And you can see it's a little thinner, but still, it's pretty heavy. So I'm going to add a little more water until I get that to be almost like a watercolor wash. Red iron oxide and Teal are really my two favorite colors to use because they look pretty much like what they're going to look like when you're done. Now that is thinner yet, and so you can see that this is, it's wet, so it looks a little darker right now, but as it dries, you're going to see this one's a little easier to read the print through than our first one. So you definitely want to be able to read the print clearly through the wash. All right, so I'm going to add a little water to my Teal also. In fact, I may have too much Teal in there. I used a spoonful, but this is a really small container. So I'm going to pour some of that out, add some water here, and stir this. I'm going to use a different brush. Maybe I'll use this brush. And again, now this is obviously a lighter color, so maybe that's too light. So I might sprinkle a little bit more Teal in there because it's a lighter color and might be able to take just a little more than the red iron. But you don't want to waste this material. So, it's better that you just start with small amounts of it. Okay, so see that? A little heavier. It's a golden color. I like this a lot for flesh tones, and you see as I apply more that I get a stronger buildup of color. So now I have two colors, and the last one is copper. And here's the deal with copper. It looks green now, but when it gets fired again, it's going to get bisque fired one more time. We're not going to put it to be glaze fired because this is not glaze. These are only oxide washes. They don't need to go up to as high of a temperature as the glaze fire. You certainly have the option to glaze your pieces. You also have the option to use underglazes, which are in the gallon containers in the metal cabinets. If you want to paint, your eyes on and real delicate details, if you want to do that, use underglazes, and then you put a clear glaze over it, and then it would be on the glaze firing shelves to be glaze fired. But if you're just using oxide washes, the copper carbonate, iron oxide red, or Teal, then it only needs to be bisque fired. So now this is pretty faint. Even if I brush 2 or 3 coats on, you can see it's pretty faint. So I might add just a tiny bit more to this one. Now it looks green now, and here's the deal. This one, unlike the other two, is not going to stay green. It's going to go kind of the color of slightly burned toast. So kind of a deep brown, almost black in the kiln. So there, that's probably all you need to do. So you can see there's a little bit of green, and as I build it up, different layers, I can really apply it as thick or thin as I want. When it's thicker like this, if it looks green on your piece, it's really going to go almost black. Now, it won't be an opaque black. It'll be just like a toasty, burned toast effect on the surface. So this one's a little more difficult to predict because it doesn't look like what it's going to look like. But I will show you how to apply them. So this is just a test piece. First thing you're going to do with your sculpture is with a slightly damp, not wet. So wring it out, as much as your fist can wring it out. You're going to just take away all the dust from your sculpture, especially on the hair and anywhere that you might have sanded or scraped it before it was fired to get it to be a little smoother. So you're just going to go over it all. I've already done that on this piece. You don't want to get it wet, but you want to get all the dust off. So let's start with the Teal, the lightest one. There's 2 ways to apply it. One is with a brush, and you can put it on, and then you can take a sponge and kind of wipe it off. So notice that it stays in the texture, and you can build this up like that, and then wipe it off so that you're just getting a wash. You don't want to see streaks like that. Does that read in the video? Yes. You don't want to see streaks. So sometimes I dab it with a sponge like this to sort of blot out any streaks. But I like to see the depth in those crevices. I like to see a little more depth. That will look about like it looks now. It'll deepen just a little bit in the bisque firing the second time. Let's see what the red iron oxide looks like. And some of that Teal has run down in these lines, but that's okay. So we're going to brush some red iron oxide, and you can see it is running down the sides a little, but that's okay. So I'm going to first brush it on, not very neatly, just kind of like that. And then I'm using my sponge to blend. Now you don't want to leave this too dark because this really darkens a lot in the firing. So I want you to pay attention here to how much I'm wiping off. And then again, you can do just sort of a dab method to get that off. And you can lighten that up. And I want you to lighten it up so you really, really see the clay through it. I'm going to rinse my sponge and lighten it more. And I'm kind of like dabbing, not just stroking. It's pretty forgiving. If I take off too much, I just add a little more on, and I just spread that around. Okay, so this will darken a lot. So even though it looks pretty light now, when it fires, it's going to look more like it did when I first put it on. Now, you can also apply it with the sponge. So you can just dip the sponge in there. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to stir it. It's already settled. It settles instantly. So like I said, every minute, every 30 seconds, you gotta stir it again. So I'm gonna dip my sponge in. Now I've got more on my sponge. And you can kind of, I wouldn't let your sponge get too wet. I'd squeeze it out a little. And look, this gives you a really nice, light, even application. But it doesn't pool in the crevices as much. So sometimes, I'll go over those crevices with a brush to get it heavier in there, and then I'll come back with the sponge. Now I'm going to rinse the sponge and start to dab away a little bit. And so I'm kind of going back and forth between putting it on, dabbing it off, putting it on, dabbing it off, until it gets just a little lighter. I would say make it 20% lighter than what you want it to be, maybe even 50% lighter than what you want it to be, because it will darken. And if you let that iron stay dark, like it is in those creases, that'll get like really, really deep tone. It will even possibly get a little bit metallic looking in those things. Now the fun thing is, now we'll try the copper too, just because I want to get all three on here for you, and then I'm going to show you how you can blend them. So again, I'm going to start with the brush, so it goes in the crevices, and then start dabbing with the sponge. I'm going to take off some of that iron in that area, and see where that is, right in that crevice there. That'll go almost black. And so here I just have a little bit of copper, so it'll be kind of toasty in this area, like blackish. So that's kind of nice to use in the hair area. Now you can use one oxide on the whole piece. You can do different areas in different oxides to sort of make things look darker or lighter. Blend, if you do that though, blend it a lot. And then one thing that I like to do is I like to mix. So I'm going to take my Teal here, and I'm going to pour some of my iron in there, so I have kind of a darker blend of the two. So now I have a whole new color that's sort of pinkish, peachy, but of course when it goes through the firing, it's not going to be pinkish, it's going to be more rusty looking with a tinge of gold. And I don't mean shiny gold, I just mean the tonality will be a little warm, warmer. So what I would suggest is start with your hair on your piece, because that's probably going to be the easiest place to start. I'm going to start, and again, I'm stirring with every single brush stroke. Don't forget to stir, because if you don't stir, you're just going to be applying water from the top of your jar. So I'm really applying that, and you can see how already it's featuring the lines that I made in there when I created my hair, the lines that we made with that knife. Get some on my part there. And then as I do this now, I'm going to go in and start to wipe away the surface. And those lines are going to stay nice and dark. And then if you hone in on that so that they can really see, so those lines will get nice and rusty colored, and this will get darker than it is, but it'll stay a lighter shade. And again, this is the blend of Teal and red iron oxide. So once you get it all done, put it on the shelves to be bisque fired again. The bisque shelves are the ones that are right across from the wedging table that face the kiln. That's where these oxides will get fired for their last time. If you decide to use underglaze from the gallon containers in the metal cabinet, then you'll apply a clear glaze over there. There's two clear glazes. There's one in the buckets called Canel's Clear, and there might also be a gallon jug of clear that you brush on also. So apply a very thin coat of clear over your underglazes, and then that would be fired in the glaze shelves, which are opposite, back to back, with the bisque shelves. Okay, I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, send me a text. Otherwise, I will see you in class next week for our final presentations. Yay.